As the sun rises over the Texas countryside, I arrive at Nick's ranch. For weeks, he has been documenting growing signs that feral hogs are moving closer to the areas where his family lives and works. Rooted up fields, damaged fences, and newly formed game trails have convinced both of us to spend the entire day inspecting the monitoring sites that have been prepared in advance. Our first stop is the backyard behind the house. Nick has repeatedly found fresh tracks here and scattered bait the day before to help monitor the level of feral hog activity. When we arrive, the ground is still covered with numerous fresh footprints. It is clear that this remains one of their regular travel routes. I feel relieved that our earlier assumptions were correct, but at the same time, I cannot ignore the concern that the hogs have moved closer to the family's living area than ever before. Leaving the ranch, we head deeper into the forest where Nick says he has often seen groups of feral hogs moving at sunrise and sunset. The air beneath the trees is cool, but the ground has been torn up across a wide area. Layers of overlapping tracks reveal that a large group passed through during the night. Standing there, I understand why Nick often says that even a few days without monitoring can lead to significant damage to pastures and crops. The third survey site is only about 300 meters from the ranch. Such a short distance shows how blurred the boundary has become between farmland and the surrounding natural habitat. As I examine the area, it becomes clear that the feral hogs have been using the same travel corridor repeatedly over many days. This information is especially valuable because it helps Nick identify which sections of fencing need reinforcement and where future monitoring efforts should be concentrated. By early afternoon, we continue to another location near the edge of the forest. The signs here indicate that activity began quite early in the day. I spend considerable time recording the locations of game trails, travel directions, and the distance to the nearest water source. As we combine observations from multiple sites, the overall picture of the hogs' range becomes much clearer. That is exactly what makes today's survey far more valuable than simply examining each location on its own. The fifth site keeps my attention for quite a while. Tracks of many different sizes appear along the same trail, ranging from large adults to young piglets. This tells us that these are not solitary animals searching for food, but an entire sounder living and traveling together. Looking at the long stretches of rooted up ground, I understand why local landowners become increasingly concerned as feral hog populations grow. In a relatively short period, they could dramatically alter the condition of pastures and cultivated land. As the sun gradually disappears behind the oak trees, we return to the final monitoring site, located back on the ranch. Even after a long day in the field, we decide to complete one last inspection to finish collecting the day's data. The results show that feral hog activity near the residential area remains significant. Nick lets out a deep sigh and says that what he hopes for most is not to find more fresh tracks, but to see these travel routes become quieter over time. I completely understand how he feels. For a ranch manager, success is measured not by a single survey, but by whether long-term efforts to protect the land and crops continue to make a real difference. As the day comes to an end, we organize all of our notes, field photographs, and map travel routes. Every survey site adds another piece to the puzzle, helping us better understand how feral hogs use the landscape around the ranch. That knowledge provides an essential foundation for making informed management decisions aimed at reducing conflicts between agriculture and wildlife, while helping preserve the balance of the local ecosystem. The first trap was set along the edge of pine forest. This time, I used a net trap instead of steel cage. With such a wide area and boars moving in large groups, this type of trap could capture several at once without making them as suspicious as enclosed cages would. After spreading bait around the area, we quickly backed away and watched from a distance. We didn't have to wait long. By late afternoon, the wild boars began to appear. One by one, they moved toward the bait site. One by one, they stepped inside without the slightest suspicion. And by the time they realized something was wrong, the entire group was already trapped inside the net enclosure. The moment I moved closer, they went into a frenzy, desperately searching for a way out, but there was none. At the next location, we placed another trap out in an open field. This area was exposed with very little cover, so the boars were much more cautious and didn't appear as quickly as they had near the forest edge. We had no choice but to leave the trap overnight. The next morning, we came back to check it, and by then, several wild boars were already caught inside. As we approached the trap, the boars became frantic once again. They desperately tried to escape, but it was impossible. The net was strong, yet flexible, absorbing every impact and completely neutralizing their attacks against it. The next location was an open clearing in the western forest near the farm. This time, we use a steel cage trap, but the most interesting part was the mesh door at the front. At first glance, it looked simple, almost unremarkable. And that was exactly what made the wild boars lower their guard. Drawn in by the scent of food, they walked inside step by step without realizing anything was wrong. Only when they turned around did they discover that the entrance they had just walked through was no longer an exit. By midday, I returned to check the final net trap near the southern edge of the forest. I stopped for a few seconds, and then I realized something unexpected. Inside were not fully grown wild boars. Almost all of them were piglets. They crowded together, constantly moving, creating a chaotic scene, but somehow it felt completely different from the previous traps. Once the situation was under control, we began the hardest part, moving each wild boar from the trap into the truck bed. The tight space made them even more aggressive, constantly resisting as we pushed them in one direction. Every step had to be carefully calculated, keeping enough distance to stay safe while still applying enough pressure to force them forward. The crashing sounds, the pounding hooves, the chaos of them stumbling over one another, it made the entire situation more tense than ever. It took quite a while before we finally managed to load them all up and secure everything before leaving the area. After checking the final trap, I stood there for a while, looking across the surrounding area. Everything had slowly gone quiet again. The chaos from earlier was gone, but this time, the feeling was different. Not complete relief, because what I was looking at wasn't just captured wild boars. It was an entire cycle beginning again. The adults could be controlled, but the young ones were only the beginning. I decided to set a total of 5 traps, and the first one was placed in an open clearing deep in the woods, an area covered with fresh signs of wild boar activity. After finishing the setup and spreading bait, I left to continue placing the remaining traps in other locations. The work lasted for hours, but throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about that first trap, wondering whether it would actually work as planned. finally returned, I could already tell from quite a distance that something had happened. The silence that normally covered the area was now broken by loud, chaotic noises coming from the direction of the trap. And as I got closer, the sight in front of me genuinely caught me off guard. Inside the trap, an entire group of aggressive wild boars had been captured. They shoved against one another, moving wildly in panic. But no matter how violently they reacted, they still couldn't escape. The second trap had been placed right beside the forest edge. After checking the first trap, I could barely wait any longer and immediately headed toward the second location. The moment I got close, I realized something was wrong. The wire mesh surrounding the trap was shaking violently in the stillness of the forest. As I moved closer, the scene became clear. A pair of wild boars was trapped inside, thrashing around desperately while trying to escape. They slammed repeatedly into the fencing, spinning around inside the confined space and creating sharp, tense bursts of noise. But despite how aggressively they reacted, the trap continued to hold them firmly inside. That day had already been more than enough, so we decided to stop and leave the remaining traps unchecked until the following morning. As darkness fell, wild boars slowly began emerging from the woods, following the scent of bait into the traps through the silence of the night. When we returned the next morning, I almost froze at the sight in front of me. The number inside had increased dramatically. It was no longer just a handful of boars like before. Now there were dozens packed tightly together inside the confined space. They moved chaotically, creating relentless crashing sounds that made the atmosphere feel more intense than ever. Another trap showed clear signs that a large number of boars had entered during the night. The tracks and damage left inside proved that the original group had been much bigger. But when we checked the trap the next morning, the scene was completely different. Only 7 boars remained inside. It was obvious that most of them had escaped. The signs around the area showed that they had actually leaped over the fencing to break free, something I never expected them to do so easily. That alone proved these wild boars were not only numerous, but also incredibly strong and extremely reckless. The final trap turned out to be the biggest surprise of all. It had been placed in the middle of an exposed clearing, a location where I honestly didn't expect much because there was almost no natural cover around it. But when we checked it, the result was the complete opposite of what I anticipated. Inside was an entire herd of wild boars, both fully grown adults and smaller juveniles, crowded tightly together inside the trap. Clearly, they had let their guard down in a way I never expected, and that was exactly what turned this trap into one of the most successful locations of the entire operation. After finishing the inspection of every trap, I stood still for a moment and looked back across the vast area surrounding us. This time, the results went far beyond my expectations, not only because of the numbers, but because of how the wild boars were adapting and reacting. Some traps worked perfectly, but other situations revealed something far more concerning. The boars were becoming bolder, more unpredictable, and much harder to control. And that made me realize one thing clearly. Even though we achieved results today, this confrontation is far from over.